إلا الله لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد. Honorable ulama kiram, respected elders, youngsters, brothers and mothers and sisters listening at home. Normally, prior to Ramadan beginning, we would actually devise our topics for the entire month. However, on this occasion, I have actually kind of left it as a free flow. So whatever topics come in mind, and if there's any topics that anybody else has in mind, by all means, you may suggest those topics to me. And inshallah, we can see where we can go with the topics that, I come up with and whatever you guys have in mind as well, inshallah. However, with the first topic that I have actually chosen is probably not exactly the same, but somewhat similar to the first topic that we spoke about at the beginning of last year. And if you remember, I did do approximately 10 days on COVID-19 itself. Probably on a similar kind of vein and carrying on from that particular topic, and trying to make sense of the situation that we currently are in. There is no doubt whatsoever that we are living through times that have never been experienced ever before. Okay, we do come across many different facts about different plagues and different diseases that may have affected humanity in the past. But there is no doubt that this particular virus, this particular pandemic that we are in is quite different to even some of those, the Spanish flu or whatever other, pandemics that you may have read about or come across on social media. But the one thing that is for sure, that being in the midst of this pandemic, and even though we are easing our way out of lockdown, we do see, and like I mentioned as well, maybe yesterday or in the Taraweeh, the evening before that the number of cases are actually rising in various parts of Europe. Many countries of Europe have actually gone into lockdown, etc., etc. And though we are easing out of a lockdown, people are actually going back into lockdown. And hence, as a result of this, we see that there is still this confusion, there is perplexion in the minds of many individuals. And, we are trying still, even after 1 year, trying to make sense of everything that is actually happening around us. And there is no doubt whatsoever that to gain direction, to gain focus, and to gain some kind of understanding of what is actually happening, and to gain even comfort, I should say, that we have to turn towards nusus, we have to turn towards Quran, we have to turn towards ahadith in gaining that direction. Upon the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously the Sahaba were in a state of disarray. They didn't know what had actually happened. People like Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu couldn't make sense of the situation at that time, and hence there he was going around saying to people that if I hear anybody saying that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually left this world and he has passed away, I will basically do away with his head. And hence he was in such a state of confusion that even he couldn't comprehend the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then to make sense of the entire situation, what happens? Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu comes forth and he recites the verses of the Quran, and he says, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. That listen, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is but a messenger. There were many other messengers that actually passed through the world and that came in the past. Even they have now left this world as well. So like they have left this world, a time was going to come. أَفَإِن مَّاتَ أَوْ قُتِلًا قَلَبْتُمْ عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِكُمْ. That a time will come when even the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will also leave this world, and he will also pass away, he will also die. And these verses of the Quran were actually revealed upon the occasion of Uhud, when there was this state of confusion and again disarray, and this rumor was spread that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, na'udhu billah, has been martyred, has been assassinated, he's been martyred. So again the Sahaba were in a state of confusion, Sahaba were in a state of of disarray. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know which way to turn. Allah revealed the verses of the Quran. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ أَفَإِن مَّاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم, that if the Prophet of Allah passes away, or if he is martyred in a battle and he's done, and he becomes a shaheed, becomes a martyr, are you going to turn back on yourself? Are you going to leave the fold of Islam? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alerted the Sahaba at that time. And when Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu recited those verses upon the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Sahaba, they say it was as though, they seemed so profound, and it was as though we have actually just descended. Though they came on the occasion of Uhud, they found comfort and solace in those verses, occasion of the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in these very same verses. So likewise, if we want to make sense of the situation that we are in, there is no doubt whatsoever that we will have to turn towards the Quran, turn towards nusus, in order to make sense of the situation that we are actually in. And as a result of this, I would like to maybe elaborate and just explain certain hadith of Sahih Muslim, which is mentioned in the chapter of fitan. And when we actually read some of the ahadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he explains the maghribat, he prophesies and he explains the events of the future. Many a times when we read those ahadith now, you will actually find as though when you read that hadith, it is as though that hadith is actually staring you in the eye. That the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, word for word, letter for letter, 1400 years ago, explained everything and all the events that will unfold and that will take place in the future and the times that we are living in. And some of these events we see unfolding before our eyes. And when those hadith, they come before our very eyes, and we read those hadith, we think to ourselves that how can the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have prophesied all of these events that are actually we are now witnessing with our own eyes? So the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, Nawas ibn Sam'an radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he says that dhakara Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam dhata ghadatin ad-Dajjal. That on one occasion, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whilst we were sat with him one morning, he decided to discuss and touch the topic of Dajjal. He mentioned Dajjal. Dajjal means to lie. Dajjal means to fabricate. Dajjal is ism mubalagha. Those of you that have studied Arabic will understand this. That where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the name Dajjal in order to emphasize the fabrication, the lies of this particular individual. So the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he talked about Dajjal. And in talking about Dajjal, whilst he was talking about him, فَخَفَّضَ فِيهِ وَرَفَّعَ, there were occasions when the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he magnified the seriousness of the situation, and he wanted us to really understand how severe this test will be upon the humans of the time witness the coming of Dajjal, or the coming of the Antichrist, as many people will know him as in English. فَخَفَّضَ فِيهِ وَرَفَّعَ. So sometimes he magnified the entire situation, and sometimes when he talked about him, it was as though he was totally insignificant. We didn't even have to worry about him. And this is why the shurrah of hadith, the commentators of hadith, he say خَفَّضَ بِمَانَا حَقَّرَ. He totally trivialized, and he made him seem as though he was totally insignificant. We didn't even have to worry about him. However, on other occasions, whilst in the same discussion, when he talked about him, رَفَّعَ أي بِمَعنَى عَظَّمَ وَفَخَّمَ, meaning he totally magnified the seriousness of the situation and how severe this test will be for the mu'min. And when he was talking about the seriousness, and when he was talking about how big a test this will be for every human, especially for the Muslims of the time, حَتَّى ظَنَنَّاهُ فِي طَائِفَةِ النَّخْلِ, he said, the Sahaba, they say it was as though we were looking over our shoulders, and we felt as though Dajjal was present amongst us, and he was hiding in a cluster of date palm trees. And many a times when you're talking, you're sat at night in a group of friends and you're discussing something, and all of a sudden, because it's night time, because the eeriness of the moment and the darkness of the night, what tends to happen is automatically, especially when you're in Jamaat, this tends to happen. And when there's ulama there, we always tend to get asked these questions. Maul Sahab, tell us some jinn stories. Have you ever come across jinnat? Have you experienced jinnat. And if you want to know a few stories, then I suggest you go to Siraz Mama, he'll tell you a few stories as well. But anyway, so and whilst you're talking about these jinn stories, all of a sudden you see there's the light will flicker and you're looking towards the light, or you see maybe the curtain moving and you're looking towards the curtain, or a door creaks and again you're looking towards that door and you're thinking, what's happening over here? We're talking about jinnat, and all of a sudden all these things are happening around us. So likewise the Sahaba are saying that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about Dajjal, and just as he was talking about him, he magnified the seriousness of the Antichrist so much that we thought as though we were looking over our shoulders. He was there, he was hiding in a cluster of trees. And obviously we were overtaken by emotions. That the Prophet of Allah, on one occasion, he's saying that this is a very serious matter. On the other occasion, he's telling us not to be worried, totally insignificant. But we were caught up in panic and in overtaken by emotions. فَلَمَّا رُحْنَا إِلَيْهِ عَرَفَ ذَلِكَ فِينَا. However, when we then came close to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and whilst we were looking at him, the Prophet of Allah, he actually saw this, and he was sensitive to the expressions on our faces, to our body language, and he saw that, these people seem somewhat disturbed, they seem somewhat worried about this entire situation. But how lucky were they that even in their emotions they were able to actually go to the Holy Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and speak to him about their feelings, about their emotions, and the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would actually then give them comfort. And unfortunately, we don't have the Prophet of Allah amongst us. And not only that, but a thing to mention as well, that because of this pandemic and the situation we are in, and as days are going by, how many times are we receiving text messages that such and such a great alim has passed away, such and such a great saint has passed away? We are living through times that, one has explained it very beautifully. He says, Qahtur Rijal, there is a famine and a drought of real men, of those pious people who are leaving us. I mean, just a few weeks ago, we were sharing text messages, and I remember speaking to so many people about our own, just over the age of 80 something. He was a short figure, very short guy, and he had a real dress sense, and he really stood out in the crowd with the way he dressed, probably a bit like Mawli Yasin at times, when he's all dolled up in every way. He's, that's the kind of figure he was, that when you saw him, you could tell that, this is someone, this guy is somebody. He used to wear a shirwani, he used to wear a pagri, and you wouldn't even find a crease in his amama. That's the kind of person he was. So you knew he was somebody, but he was a short guy, really skinny, and you wouldn't even understand that this guy is such a great Shaykhul Hadith. I remember when we were studying, many of you will have heard the names of the likes of Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri Sahib, who's one of the Shaykhul Hadith of Daber, and a great a great luminary of India, Gujarat, we come from, and a great alim of his time. But yet I remember on one occasion, he actually came to Dewsbury where we were studying, and we were often blessed that whenever luminaries like Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri Sahib and other, mashallah, great scholars would come, they'd often come to the madrasa just to visit the madrasa, obviously to meet the ulama of the madrasa, etc., etc. And then we as students would be blessed with a special gathering and a special talk, exclusive for us guys, and we'd be able to sit in a bayan and listen to their advices. So likewise, Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri Sahib, I remember he sat on the chair and he was about to start his bayan, and our Shaykhul Hadith was actually sat on the floor beside him. And when he started talking, I remember recited some couplets in Farsi, in Persian, and then obviously we've not studied Farsi, so we didn't understand what it meant. So he explained it to us, and he said that, listen, in certain copies of the Quran, in certain prints of the Quran, you'll find that Surah Ikhlas is at the top of the page, Surah Lahab is at the top of the page, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses the uncle Abu Lahab sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yet Surah Ikhlas, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a description of himself, he describes himself, he explains his magnitude, his azmat, his glorification, etc. And that Surah Ikhlas is at the bottom of the page. So the prints are such that Surah Lahab is at the top of the page, Surah Ikhlas is at the bottom of the page. But he then turned around and said, but that doesn't mean to say that Surah Lahab has a higher status than Surah Ikhlas because it's at the bottom of the page. There is no doubt that in Surah Ikhlas, Allah Ta'ala introduces himself and he talks about his glory, his might and his powers, etc. So there is no doubt that that surah is an introduction of Allah, and it's a great surah. And even though Surah Al-Lahab is at the top of the page, it doesn't mean to say it has a higher status. And then he actually said that all because of the fact that I'm sat on the chair. And we didn't even know this to this point. He said, all because of the fact that I'm sat on the chair and my teacher. So our Shaykhul Hadith Sahib was actually the teacher of Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri Sahib. He actually studied many Alim class books under his tutelage. So he was his tutor. So he's saying that I'm, all because of the sat high upon this chair and my teacher sat beside me on the floor. That doesn't mean to say I've got a higher status than my teacher. So Shaykhul Hadith Sahib, he was a unique individual, so unique in so many ways. You know, he's probably done over 50 Hajj. Umrahs were countless. And many times, you know, you're probably thinking 50 Hajj, how did he manage such a thing? And he used to actually tell us, and I remember Maulana Zakir recording it as well, that on one occasion, in one of the lessons, he actually said to us that when he was a young child, he saw in a dream that he was actually reciting Surah Hajj. Now his father, Maulana Shamsuddin Sahib, many of you won't even know Maulana Shamsuddin. Maulana Shamsuddin was the father of our Shaykhul Hadith Sahib. Our Shaykhul Hadith Sahib was called Mufti Muslihuddin. And he had brothers as well. His brothers were called Muhyiddin and Qabruddin. His brother also recently passed away, literally a few weeks apart from his brother. So Maulana Shamsuddin Sahib is the one that actually wrote Ahsanul Qawaid. So those of you that are slightly aged will know that when you read your Alif Bata and you did your Amara, Balagha, Rafa'a, Sama'a, whatever you pray, he was the person that actually authored that Qaida. He was the writer of the Qaida that we prayed when we were young as well. Obviously nowadays you guys are using the Safar Qaida and Nurani Qaida and the different books that you're using nowadays. But Maulana Shamsuddin Sahib was the one that actually authored this very Sipara that we used to read, you know, in the early years when we were being introduced to obviously the Arabic language and the recitation of the Quran. So Maulana Shamsuddin Sahib, he says that my father, in the front of his Quran, he had written that if a person sees himself praying this surah in the Quran, this is the interpretation of that dream. If he prays this surah of the Quran and he sees himself praying this surah of the Quran in the dream, this is the interpretation of that dream. And he saw that under Surah Hajj, he had written that if a person sees himself reciting Surah Hajj in his dream, that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take him for Hajj time and time again. And our Shaykhul Hadith actually saw a dream in which he was reciting Surah Hajj, and that was the interpretation of his dream. And like I said, Allah ta'ala made his dream come true, whereby he must have done over 50 Hajj, countless Umrahs. And he was such an immaculate person in terms of his actual expertise in teaching Bukhari in itself. I often say to some of the students, and I might have even shared this with some of the mashallah Darul students here and some of them who graduated mashallah, that when he used to teach Bukhari, he used to teach right from the very beginning to the end, whereby he would give dars all the way throughout the year. Many of those that have been in Bukhari, they will tell you that when you start Bukhari at the beginning of the year, the Ustad and the Shaykhul Hadith that is teaching you Bukhari, they will tend to start off with obviously commentating and obviously explaining the ahadith for maybe the first few months. However, the book of Bukhari has over 6,000 ahadith. And many of you have probably not seen what Bukhari Sharif actually looks like. If you do want to see and you really want to see it, let us know. Myself or Zakim or Yasin will take you upstairs in the library and he'll show you what Bukhari looks like. There's hundreds of pages. And to get through all of those ahadith in explaining every individual hadith is actually totally impossible. So as a result of this, what would then happen is normally after a couple of months of receiving commentary from your teacher on individual ahadith, what they tend to do is what we call, what do you call it? Riwayatan. So then you basically start praying hadith after hadith after hadith after hadith, and maybe on occasions the Shaykhul Hadith may stop and do kalam or talk on a certain and explain a certain hadith. But otherwise all you're doing is you're just reading. You're just reading those hadith in order to get to the end of the book by the end of the year. Otherwise it is totally impossible. But Shaykhul Hadith Sahib, because of the number of years that he actually taught Bukhari Sharif, he used to comment and used to give explanations of a hadith from the very beginning all the way to the end of the year. Day in our lesson where we actually sat and he didn't make kalam or he didn't comment on certain ahadith, and he knew exactly, because some ahadith are very much repetitive and they're repeated in different chapters of Bukhari Sharif as well. See, Imam Bukhari Rahmatullahi, the way he does it is that he brings title, and whatever ahadith are relevant to that title, even if it has the slightest of significance, he will bring that hadith under that chapter, under that particular title. Even though it may not have a complete relevance, because it's connected in some way, he will basically bring that hadith under that particular title as well. So Shaykh al-Hadith would know where each hadith is going to come, where it's repeated, where it actually holds a stronger connection with the Tarjumat al-Bab, with the title that Imam Bukhari has brought, and he would then talk on that hadith when it would come under that particular title. So throughout the entire year, for many years, I mean 20, 25 years, he taught Bukhari just in Dewsbury alone. And prior to that, for many years, he was teaching Bukhari in a madrasa in Baroda in India. So you can imagine the magnitude of the person. And yet if you saw him, so simple, short guy. Yeah, he had a dress sense, like I mentioned. But otherwise, and we've lost a person that is, and I say that he's irreplaceable. No, you cannot find another person of his caliber, of his magnitude, to actually come and teach Bukhari. Okay, there'll be, mashallah, so many other people with a lot of capability, and they will replace him. But of his magnitude, we will never probably find anyone even in a lifetime. That's the truth of the matter. So at this moment in time, unfortunately, we are losing people. Qahtul Rijal. There's a drought and a famine of people, of luminaries who are leaving us. And the Sahaba were blessed with this opportunity, that whenever they had these emotions building up inside of them, or they had any questions, and when the Prophet of Allah ﷺ talked about certain things, in order to allay their fears and to get rid of these emotions and to come to find, to bring solace to their hearts and to bring comfort to their hearts, they were able to go to the Holy Prophet of Allah ﷺ and speak to him. And the Prophet of Allah ﷺ would comfort them. So when the Prophet of Allah ﷺ saw this state of confusion, panic on the faces of the Sahaba, he comforted them and he said, listen, do not worry. إِن يَخْرُجْ وَأَنَا فِيكُمْ فَأَنَا حَجِيجُهُ إِن يَخْرُجْ وَأَنَا فِيكُمْ فَأَنَا حَجِيجُهُ. That listen, if he by chance appears and he comes onto the earth, and I am still present amongst you, and I am in your midst, I am here, then do not worry, I will contend to him. I will take care of him on your behalf, on behalf of the ummah. I am here for you. However, if it so happens that he arrives and he comes after my time, and I am no longer here, وَإِن يَخْرُجْ فَامْرُؤٌ حَجِيجُ نَفْسِهِ. If I am no longer here, then remember, each and every individual will be independently responsible for himself. Will be independently. And from this, I take my first deduction of the situation are in. Whether the masajid are in lockdown, whether we are entering into Ramadan, imagine the doors of the masajid were still locked and you are not able to come over here. If the masjid was open, alhamdulillah, you could come over here. And the ai and the ulama, and the imams, and the ulama that come to our masajid, they give us this spiritual injection by talking to us, by speaking to us, by advising us. It boosts our iman. Here they are helping us to basically take our iman to another level. And then this spiritual boost then carries us for the rest of the month, whereby we want to come to the masjid, we want to pray Quran, we want to pray tahajjud, we want to sit in dua, we want to engage in acts of charity, etc. But if by chance, so the imams are taking that load upon themselves, they are taking that responsibility for you. But where the masajid are locked, as we experienced in the previous Ramadan, and the doors were shut, we couldn't come inside the masjid, the vibes were not there, the buzz wasn't there, we were within the confinements of our homes, and there we were trying to even get a little bit of ambience of the masjid, and trying to even feel a little bit of the vibes over the airways, whether it was on YouTube, whether it was on Mixler. But unfortunately, on occasions such as those, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ is teaching us, فَإِمْرَأٌ, every human, فَحَجِيجُ نَفْسِهِ, you are independently responsible for yourself. So if ever in the future we are faced with any situation such as this, and whether we are faced with it or not, the lesson we need to learn from this situation that we were in, that we have to be independently responsible for ourselves, for our own amal, for our own Ramadan, for our own namaz, etc., etc. This is one of the lessons we need to take from this whole pandemic and from this whole situation in which we find ourselves, though it may be a state of confusion. But the lesson we need to deduce, we are responsible for ourselves. Inshallah, we'll carry on from there tomorrow. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safeguard us all, safeguard our iman, and Allah ta'ala help us to come through and get out of this pandemic, inshallah, with afiyat, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.